Hi guys, the people of Northern Ireland are facing two problems. One is budget cuts from Westminster, and the second is a non-functioning executive. This means whatever money is available, civil servants are not comfortable with allocating it, as that is the job of politicians. And the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland's job isn't to get involved in the allocation of funding in regards to devolved matters, which means that important services are facing an uncertain future. In this clip from BBC Northern Ireland, they explain the human cost of the DUP's boycott of the executive, and also the brass face of one DUP MP asking about cuts. Have a listen.
Ellie has severe learning difficulties and she has issues with communication and social interaction.
Ellie is nearly 4 and she attends Little Orchids. It's a special children's centre in Londonderry, and her mum says it's changed her life.
Ellie had very little contact with me. Ellie didn't like physical touch. She had limited eye contact and sometimes she lived in her own world. There was none of that bond that you would think that a parent had with their child. But coming here to Little Orchids, they brought Ellie out of her shell. They taught me how to go into Ellie's world and how to become the best parent that I can be for Ellie.
But with expected cuts by the Department of Education to the Pathway Fund, which helps this centre run, its service could be halved, meaning children like Ellie will miss out. Little Orchids is just one of 187 projects supported by the Pathway Fund that help a range of vulnerable children.
At this stage, over 10,000 children are due to be impacted across communities in Northern Ireland due to cessation of the funding, which will absolutely be devastating to the early learning and care sector.
Now, before we get to the Select Committee, the Pathway Fund, you can see here, set up and operated from 2021 to 2023. It says here the Department of Education's Pathway Fund from 2021-2022 and provisionally 2022-2023 will open for application. Okay, this is, as we saw here, it provides funding for daycare, for childminders, for children like Ellie here. Now, what's the problem? The problem is that there isn't an executive up in Northern Ireland at the moment. There isn't a local government. And if there isn't a government, if there isn't an executive, then they can't have a budget. If they don't have a budget, then they can't allocate funding, for example, to the Pathway Fund. So it needs the executive up and running in order to make sure that this part of the Department of Education receives the funding it needs. But without the executive, it can't get the funding. And the Northern Ireland Secretary of State can't get involved in this. These are devolved issues. This is not something that Westminster is to be involved in. But let's hear what a DUP MP had to say about that.
Earlier today, little reassurance was given about the future of the Pathway Fund when it was raised by MPs at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee.
People are put on notice now with their jobs for the Pathway funding. Is there any hope that you can give them today in relation to that fund being extended beyond June?
You have a DUP MP raising concerns about funding for the Pathway Fund and the staff that will be laid off because there won't be the funding available. And why is the funding not available? Because there isn't an executive operating. Why isn't there an executive operating? Because the DUP are complaining about the Northern Ireland Protocol. They've pulled the plug. They've thrown these people under a bus because they're not happy with the protocol. Why are they not happy with the protocol? Because the protocol demonstrates a Brexit that they didn't want.
Mm-hmm. I guess none of us can, Carla, because it is funded directly from the department. None of us could give a commitment today about that. But I think what I would say as well is, yes, that's one specific programme. When you look at the totality of all of those programmes, it's very stark.
The Department of Education says its budget allocation for the year ahead is extremely challenging and will require significant reductions across a wide range of areas. Interim funding is in place until the end of June, but beyond that, the future of the Pathway Fund is still unclear. Lindsay Telford.
once again, why is this happening? Because there isn't an executive, because there isn't an education secretary or an education minister, as is the case in Northern Ireland. There isn't a minister, so the civil servants can't decide how the funding is allocated. The minister has to decide. There isn't a minister. Why isn't there a minister? Because there isn't an executive. Why isn't there an executive? Because the DUP have pulled the plug. And these are the people who are suffering the consequences of that. Not the DUP, not the MLAs, not the politicians. They're perfectly fine. They're still getting paid. Now, thankfully, it seems, well, not thankfully, hopefully, it seems that the executive will be up and running from September. But this will be too late for many of these operations, for the Pathway Fund perhaps. I hope it's not. I hope the Pathway Fund can get up and running, will get the funding it needs. But if people in Northern Ireland are not angry with the DUP, they should be. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think about all of this. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.